All right, this is the second epistle of Paul to the church of Corinth. He changes gears a little bit, as we see the Bible often do. If you remember chapter 1, he was recounting a lot of trouble that he had. He had to prove, he was trying to prove to the Corinthians that he was a genuine apostle. And the reason they didn't believe him was very strange to our way of thinking. It's because he was suffering, he wasn't wealthy, sick in his body, and had been through a lot of trouble. Well, they said, well, an apostle of the Lord shouldn't be going through any trouble like that. And he set them straight and said, that's not true. That's actually confirmation that God had called him and that the enemy was after him. As we've seen complete from the book of Acts up till now, in Acts he detailed seemingly the group of Jewish law followers that would follow him around and try to disrupt his preaching, disrupt his meetings. In fact, they wanted to kill him. He talks a little bit more about that in 2 Corinthians. So let's start verse 1. But I determined this with myself, that I would not come again to you in heaviness. For if I make you sorry, who is he then that maketh me glad, but the same which is made sorry by me? And I wrote the same unto you, lest when I came I should have sorrow from them of whom I ought to rejoice, having confidence in you all, that my joy is the joy of all of you. Verse 4. For out of much affliction and anguish of heart I wrote unto you with many tears. Hope you hear Paul's heart in that. Not that you should be grieved, but that you might know the love which I have more abundantly unto you. Clearly, Paul was, when he says, I didn't want to come to you in heaviness, he didn't want to come bearing a bad message. He didn't want to give them bad news. He didn't want to correct them like he had done before. He would have rather that he, come with encouragement and words of joy. But that's not what the first letter called for. So he said this time, he didn't come when he said he was going to. That's why he's explaining why he didn't make the trip yet. But he said, I determined because I didn't want to come to you with heaviness. He changed his plans, and the Corinthians had misinterpreted that he didn't want to come and see him. And that wasn't the case at all. So he reminds them of his sorrowful visit to them before. And this time he said, carrying on the same thought from chapter 1, he's defending himself against the Corinthian Christians. So think about this. This man has trouble from, the heathen. He has trouble from the Jewish law followers that hadn't got saved. And he has trouble from the church at Corinth. They don't trust him yet. As I said, they don't think he should be in sorrow or anything wrong, kind of like the healthy, wealthy, and wise gospel today. That's how they thought he would be. Then he changes his travel plans and doesn't come when he said he was going to. Well, that just gave him more ammunition to go after him. They use the change of plans to say of Paul, he's unreliable and he's untrustworthy. We don't need to listen to him at all. See how the enemy worked? Discrediting the man of God, the people say, well, we don't have to listen to what he has to say, thereby not wanting to listen to what God has to say through him. So that's why he's explaining it. He didn't want to come again in sorrow. His first visit that we read in the first letter came with a lot of conflict, unpleasantness. So he determined this time to not have another sorrowful visit with the Corinthians. He didn't like it the first time. Seems that Paul thought it best to give the Corinthian Christians a little room and give them space to repent and get their act together, not come at them again with correctiveness. He didn't want to rebuke and admonish them all the time. That was Paul's heart. He knew that another visit of the same type of 1 Corinthians would be to their detriment. Be too much correction, too much scolding, too much. So he decided to back off, and he's explaining why he backed off. This letter, Paul makes mention of another letter that we don't have. in our Bible. It's lost, but he's referring to that in here. So we can assume that it did not pass the test, whatever other letter he wrote. He wrote many more letters than what we have. That was the way of communicating back then. But God must not have wanted it preserved, must not have wanted it in our New Testament. So he's coming and saying, much, verse 4, much affliction and anguish I wrote to you with many tears. I hope that impresses us tonight, because he's trying to let them know, what was up, because they didn't respect him. But he's letting them know, hey, I have a heart for you as believers. I've shed tears for you. So in addition to all his other problems, he wants the people of Corinth to know that he loves them. So let's go on a little bit. All right, verses 5 through 7. This is probably the crux of tonight, by the way. But if any have caused grief, he hath not grieved me, but in part that I may not overcharge you all. Suffice to say, such a man is this punishment, which was afflicted of many. Got to include verse 7. So that contrawise you ought rather to forgive him and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. What is he talking about? Well, obviously, there was a man in the congregation. Scholars have said it could have been one that he referred to, or it could have been someone new that he hadn't talked about before. If you remember back in 1 Corinthians, he talked about someone in the church that had an incestuous affair and with a stepmother. Could have been that who he's talking about. What the Corinthians did was they rebuked this brother and they threw him out of the church. So he no longer had the support and comfort of believers until he would repent and then come back and be restored. The trouble was the Corinthians weren't going to restore him. His punishment was going to be forever banishment from their assembly. And Paul says, no. Which is what he's writing on. He said, you don't want to be too severe. Apparently the man was underneath church discipline, even as Paul instructed in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. He received punishment which was afflicted by the majority. Afterwards, the man apparently repented, but the Corinthian Christians would not receive him back. Therefore, Paul tells them to be too severe. So we get it, right? Paul said to forgive him and comfort him. Actually, more than forgive, he told them to comfort. And the word he used was a judicial forgiveness. Otherwise, it'd be too much. The man might just, forever leave following the Lord. Today we call that extreme church hurt, I guess, and that happens. But Paul said, lest someone be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Their harsh stance toward this man had a real danger. By withholding restoration and forgiveness, they risk ruining him. How many people, I ask rhetorically, how many people do you know that to this day have an ought of some type against the church and they don't go anymore? And sometimes what happened to them was valid, most of the time, but it's a shame that it can't be patched up. And that's what Paul's saying here. That there's a time for the rebuke and correction, but there's also a time for forgiveness, welcoming back. Let's go on to get this part tonight, because this is the main reason why. Verse 8. Wherefore I beseech you that you would confirm your love toward him. For to this end also did I write, that I might know the proof of you, whether ye be obedient in all things. To whom ye forgive anything, I forgive also. For if I forgave anything, to whom I forgive it, for your sakes forgive I it the person of Christ. Here's why, verse 11. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. So Paul's making a big statement there. This withholding of affirmation, withholding of love, withholding of allowing that one to come back in and join the assembly would give an opportunity for the enemy to destroy him. because Paul, states we're not ignorant of his devices, his cunningness, the things that he can do. And Paul, he's got a real good idea of how the devil works, because he's seen it in his own life. He saw it in his former life as a persecutor of the church, and so he doesn't want them to make that same mistake. He doesn't want the devil to get an advantage. He forgives. He said, this is kind of a test for you to be obedient in all things. Be obedient to God, because I, as God's man, am telling you what I know to be the truth. So if you're not, you don't want to follow me, and you're thinking up excuses and reasons why I'm no good, we really don't want to hear from the Lord. One Bible commentator named Von Trapp describes how Satan loves to take advantage, and I like this. That wily merchant, that greedy bloodsucker, that devoureth not widows' houses, but men's souls. Jesus said that's what he came for, to kill, to destroy, to deceive, and that's what he does. And if he can get an advantage in this man's life, he would take full advantage of it. If he can get an advantage in our life because of some hurt, he'll take advantage of it. And we'll think it's all us. We'll think we're getting upset with valid reasons, but don't forget, the enemy's there too with his servants, and they can help flame the fires, of anybody. Remember the Apostle Peter, 3.5 years? Lord, I'll never deny you? Of course not. He watched him walk on water. Peter joined him. He saw Jesus' miracles and healings. Then when it came crunch time, though, he denied 3 times that he knew him and cursed. Peter. Then he went out and wept bitterly. So he did the right thing. He humbled himself. He repented. And he went on to become just as great a leader of the early church as the Apostle Paul. He just was an apostle to the Gentiles, while Paul was an apostle to the Jews. So to withhold forgiveness from the repentant is to play into the hands of the devil. Nothing more dangerous than to give Satan a chance of reducing a sinner to despair. Whenever we fail to comfort those that are moved to a single confession of their sin, then we too would play right into his hands. So I thought that was good. His devices. Satan has specific strategies. That's what that word means, one of the definitions. Specific strategies he uses to take advantage of us. Paul could say, I'm not ignorant of these strategies, but many Christians couldn't say the same thing. They couldn't see the thing that Paul was saying. Satan's strategy against the sinning man was first focused on lust. That's what got him into trouble. Then he used hopelessness and despair. Then he used the church against the man. So you see how that all domino effect. John Calvin defined the devices of the devil as the artful schemes and tricks of which believers ought to be aware, and will be if they allow the Spirit of God to rule them. I thought that's a pretty good statement. If someone's wallowing in the spirit of despair and despondency, I hope they're aware that the devil's strategy is to do that. What weak point can he exploit? What chink in our armor? Where he can get a foothold? So we too shouldn't be ignorant of the devices that he uses. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's stop there.